Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert from BC Training. Today's subject is building crisis and incident management teams, and is with industry expert and current chair of the BCI, James McAlister. A former police officer, James has been working within business continuity management for over 30 years. He is a fellow of the Business Continuity Institute and is one of BC Training's esteemed senior tutors. Many of you have emailed your questions into us already, so we'll pass these on to James. Thank you for these. The webinar will last a maximum of an hour. Later today, we will email a copy of the webinar over to you. Just to let you know that the next webinar will be on Friday, 25th of August, at the later time of 2 p.m. with our friend from the US, Ralph Petty, and he will be speaking on the supply chain business management, supply chain business continuity planning, and how critical it is for the small to medium business market. So today we're covering building crisis and incident management teams. James is a panelist. I'll hand over to him in a second, just to remind you that you can ask questions by clicking on the right-hand side on the dashboard, and Becca will be fielding the questions through to James as we go. So over to James. Just a couple of seconds. Right, James, you should be.
I'm just checking. Have you got my screen?
Yes, we have your screen. I'm going to switch off and I'll leave you to it.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on a Friday morning, or Friday wherever you are. Actually, today's subject, building incident and crisis management teams. I've been really fortunate over the last 30 years to be involved in building countless incident and crisis management teams, public order, into firearms, and more latterly into the private sector. So let's begin. What we're going to cover this morning in this very short session is building crisis management capability, developing crisis management teams, the importance of crisis leadership, and also crisis decision making. So, building crisis management capability. I'm going to start with a quote from the British Standard 11-200. An organisation might have established processes for managing routine disruptions. However, crises can be dynamic and unpredictable and become difficult to manage. Crises challenge organisations, their people, functions and processes unusually, and require dedicated and dynamic management and response. And what we're going to deal with for the rest of this session is how we get dedicated, dynamic management who can actually respond to a whole myriad of different incidents, crises or disruptions, because you can use this methodology right across our platform and our disciplines, from emergency management, major incident management, crisis management, general incident management, business continuity disruptions. It goes right across the pack. I've been using this type of methodology for the past 20 years or so. Obviously, I've refined it as I've gone along. So, developing crisis management teams then. Obviously, we know, and you will have a mixture of these people within your teams, that you need a leader. You may well have, depending on the context of the incident, HR, operations, communications, legal, finance, a business continuity representative, somebody from IT. You could have the health and safety there, security, risk, data security, audit, a whole mixture of people. We've got a question actually from Moses, who's from Exchanging. And the question is, my current crisis management teams includes the following representatives with appointed deputies. Executive management, and that's C-level only, business unit management, and then support management, including group communications, legal department, facilities and building management, staff welfare through human resources, finance, information technology, and they also include a BCM. And the question is, Is this too much for a decisive and appropriate decision-making forum? Well, that really depends on. What I generally do is I will look at an organization and I will form a crisis or an incident management team based on what that company or organization does. And I'll look at their organizational chart and I'll pick people across the spectrum of the organization that represents what they do. I'll also include the recovery departments, for example, HR, communications, finance, legal, IT, those people as well in that group. But that doesn't mean to say that I'm going to stand them to for every crisis or incident we deal with. For example, using the people that are on the screen at the moment, if we were dealing with an incident involving security, we wouldn't necessarily involve HR or data security in it if it was a physical security issue. So my answer to Moses would be, I quite like on paper having a expansive, holistic organizational team. When the incident occurs, the leader should then pick the people with the right skills and attributes and expertise to then deal with the incident we're dealing with. I've also seen it where the whole team has been stood to, and then people are then stood down because they don't fit the context of the incident. So I hope that answers your question. Crisis management priorities then. It's really important when you have the team together that they have an understanding of actually what they should be doing. I'm trying to answer questions as well, or look at questions while I'm working through. So some of the priorities need to be, and the big thing for me, whatever we're dealing with, we've got to be situationally aware. And whether we call it situational awareness, whether we call it ground truth, as they do in the military, or whether they do it in the emergency services, a common operating picture, situational analysis, if you haven't got situational analysis, you won't make good decisions. It's not possible to make good decisions without being situationally aware or contextually aware of what's happening. And situational awareness isn't just being dumped with information. It's information that has gone through some form of analysis, and you come up with an intelligence picture. Now, the private sector don't love the word intelligence. So if you take it as raw data through process becomes information, that's fine, but you're going to have to do some form of analysis, and I will get to that very soon. You've got to have people in the group A who have the empowerment, or they're far enough up in the food chain to actually make the decisions that that group's all about. For example, if this is a crisis management team at C-level, C-suite level, senior managers, then there's no point in having representatives from a tactical or an operational level sitting within that team if they can't make decisions. And I have seen this many times where deputies have stood up and haven't had the power, and what it means is it just becomes a talking shop and actually not an incident management team. You've also got to understand that it's all about responding. It isn't let's sit around on beanbags and have a workshop based on the issue in hand. We need to actually turn the talking into doing. So we've got to get to actions. And there are going to be timescales built into that ability to respond. Communicating. We've got to be able to communicate not only internally, but externally. And it's how we do that. And one of the biggest parts of this is understanding who our interested parties are. And if we wait till the crisis or the incident or the disruption to start thinking about interested parties, then we are going to be well behind the game. Hopefully, we've identified, people like our regulators, our governors, our critical customers and clients, critical suppliers, people within the organization who will make things work, and people we have to communicate with. That's not forgetting that we also have to communicate with every single employee, for example, at various times with different messages. Monitoring. A lot of people forget that we decide what we're going to do, and then everybody's so busy slapping themselves on the back that we've done something in time that they don't actually monitor or review whether or not what we've actually done is working or has worked. And that also causes major problems, because if we don't monitor what we're doing, we don't understand whether we've been successful. So how are we going to actually monitor? Don't forget as well, while we're dealing with the crisis, the incident, don't forget we've got to think about everyday business operations. Maybe not at the moment if this is a life-causing or life-threatening incident. We have to get through that initial response phase. But when we're thinking about kicking into business continuity, it's got to be relatively seamless. So within the team, we do need to have an eye on business continuity. And also, there's no point in trying to recover when we're all sitting down at the end for the debrief. We've got to have planned from response into business continuity and then into recovery so it appears seamless. And you'll only be able to do that if you think about business continuity and recovery almost at the beginning, because they've got to overlap and they've got to dovetail. And if they don't overlap and dovetail, it won't work. Okay. Now, what I find is the military and the emergency services throughout the globe are pretty good at enhancing their commanders, or in the private sector's case, the managers, senior managers with support staff. What I find in the private sector is you're absolutely awful. Basically, you stick a group of experts or very senior people in a room and then expect them to do everything themselves with hardly any support whatsoever. The military and the police, from my previous occupation is obviously police, and one of my main jobs was being chief of staff or support staff function to senior commanders during incidents and emergencies. So I spent an awful lot of my police career making things easier for the commanders so they could make good crisis management decisions unbridled with all logistical issues or all information management issues. So what I'm going to go through now is some idea about how you can support your crisis management teams with a wider support staff function. One of the roles that people never consider is a room manager. So somebody in the incident or crisis management room, managing the room, making things happen, driving the people when there's deadlines to meet, reminding them that there's a meeting coming up in 30 minutes, bringing them in intelligence packages, taking tasks from the room out to people who are then going to task subordinates within the organization to work on issues and problems. That's a role I used to do an awful lot of, a room manager in major incidents. And it's a fascinating role. It's a brilliant role. But what you can't do is let the leader of the team do that role, because they'll just become embroiled in things that aren't crisis sensitive. It's all the other stuff that's going on. So let the commanders or the people within inside the room, the senior managers, the incident managers, deal with the incidents, and then all the peripheral stuff goes through the room manager, who's then the pivotal link to other primary roles. For example, decision logists. They're going to be working in the room, noting, not taking meeting minutes, but using decision logists methodology to actually record decisions, and not just what we're doing, how we got there. So what was the information we had to begin with? What is the impact on the organization? Analyzing a range of options, deciding which are our preferred options, turning those into actions, and then noting down whether or not they worked or not. That's the role of a decision logist. Not, let's just take a load of notes. The idea of individual senior managers or commanders writing their own logs is ridiculous, because while they're doing that, they're not focusing on the issue. And I always say, in a crisis, information is like a rabbit. Once you take your eye off a rabbit, you'll never find it again. So you've got to keep your eye on the ball of the crisis. You've got to keep watching the crisis. And if you're writing notes, you're not watching the crisis. And that's the whole point of decision loggers. Call takers and makers. The last thing you want is everybody in the room in the middle of your crisis discussion trying to formulate strategy, for example, is phones going off. People making phone calls or taking phone calls with snippets of information. And that snippet of information either gets lost within the room, it certainly won't get noted down if it's the decision makers who are taking the calls. So you can have that function outside the room, and then when the call takers take the call, they can fill in some form of template, bring it into the room, hand it to the room manager. The room manager analyzes that data and decides, do we need to work the problem more, glean more information, or is it in a suitable condition to then bring into the discussion? Information analysts, I can't stress enough that you will get information overload. You get sensory overload with the amount of information that could come into you in the thick of a crisis. Your information demand will always exceed the available information, but at some time you will be overloaded with information. And you'll also be overloaded with misinformation, not verified, not credible, not reliable information. And if that comes into your incident room, trust me, you will become overwhelmed. Therefore, before it comes into the room, it should go through some form of analysis to verify it, check it, and also work the problem. Information is like a jigsaw. It's pieces of the jigsaw, and a little piece on its own may make no sense and can easily be lost. The beauty of having analysts outside your crisis and incident room is they'll work it up into a package and then bring it in. And I'm not talking this is how to run crisis on a ridiculously huge scale. Most private sector organizations nowadays have analysts. They have people who play with data all the time. All you do is you change them from their day job, where they may well be looking at politics or variations in sales or whatever they normally do, and you put them to think about crisis, performance indicators, and focus and topics that they need to consider. Specialist advisors as well. Remember, you can't have everybody in the room. The people in the room are decision makers. Specialist advisors, depending on what the incident you're dealing with, should be identified based on the context of the incident and then come in when you need them. And there may be times you don't want to have discussions in front of them. So they may have to understand that they're going to leave and then they're going to come back. A primary example with that from the policing world is I used to do a lot of specialist advising with terrorism. But there are occasions where I would be asked to leave the room if there was very, very top secret information that was going to be discussed. It didn't detract from what I was doing as an advisor. I'd go out, I'd come back in, and then we'd carry on. But specialist advisors, you really need to think about how you use those. This is a concept called storyboard. Once again, it is a very sophisticated method of recording high significant information and displaying it on the walls of your incident management room. The best way to do this is obviously via a smart board where somebody is given the job of storyboard, working in conjunction with the information analysts, and they present significant information changes on a board within the crisis management room that everybody can look at and observe. You can also do this as a paper feed as well. But storyboard, I've found, certainly with incidents that run longer than 4 or 5 hours, you lose track of what's happened, what you've done, and where you're going. And storyboard is very different from a decision logist. Actioners. Actioners are the people who are going to actually make things happen. Now, that will be working under the room manager. So if the team decide they're going to do X, Y, and Z, the room manager will take them out to the actioners who will then make that happen. They'll also then make sure it's happening, so they're part of the monitoring and review, and then they'll also report back to the room manager who will then feed into the room, those tasks have now been done, or these are the results of those tasks. And then media response. I know latterly in my operational career, within every crisis and incident management room, we would have somebody in the room or just outside the room, monitoring all social media, all traditional media, and then responding as quickly as their thumbs could possibly respond, under some guidance and some criteria of what they were allowed to say or respond to. But nowadays, if you don't involve instant media response, the ability to instantly respond to the media, normally social, you are miles behind. An example would be during the riots in Liverpool of 2011. I was working in the control room. We were working with media, and the problem was people were saying things on social media, but by the time we got it sanctioned by the assistant chief constable who was running the operation, we were 20 tweets, 30 tweets behind. Absolutely no point in responding, because we'd missed the window of opportunity to respond. So if you're going to play with social media, if you're going to work with social media in a crisis, you've got to be dynamic and proactive and go for it. Right, let's have a look at one of my favourite topics, which is crisis management leadership. Now, I always ask my students, are leaders made or born? And there's always a discussion around, let's think of our top 10 greatest leaders of all time. And I would pose a quiz. Who is this person on the slide? It's Hannibal, one of the world's acclaimed greatest leaders of all time. People have different views, but we all agree there's a huge difference between management and leadership. And the things that constantly come up with leaders is they've got to be inspiring, they've got to be charismatic, they've got to make you want to follow them. Not because of their position, but because of the type of people they are. So leaders, I would suggest, is more to do with personality than it ever really is with any taught leadership skill you can gain from a 2-day management course. Now, therein lies the problem, because in our organizations, it's very, very difficult to choose leaders who are 1 minute managing the merchandising department, and the next minute they are the leader of a crisis management team when things have gone horrifically wrong. So there has to be some form of compromise. Through training, you can help these people gain those skills. But remember, it doesn't always have to be the most senior person within the team who will actually lead the team. And I've seen that numerous times. I run a lot of courses for the European Commission to prepare people for disaster missions abroad. And we quite often see in the training where the crisis teams get together to deal with the incident, and they'll be from across, the entire European states. And the actual senior person in the room isn't the eventual leader. It's somebody generally who is at a leading rank, but they've just got it within them to be a good leader. So irrespective of the, appointing Hannibal as your team leader, some of the primary leadership responsibilities include things like making sure that everybody understands the common operating picture. So what does the incident look like now? And now will change every minute in the early stages of an incident. So it's important that the team leader, the chair of the group, really drives whoever is providing our information updates to make sure that they keep coming in and they are verified and they are as accurate and as worthwhile as we can possibly make them. Another thing that I find with leaders, having observed leaders for the past 25 years, is that a lot of leaders like to lead sat on their backside, almost wearing their smoking jacket and holding a brandy. And for me, that doesn't work. I like leaders up on their feet. I like leaders who are working the room I like leaders who are making sure that everybody is on task, whether it be at an incident management team at strategic, tactical, or operational levels. What you want is, I think, my best leaders and the skills that I try and show is to be up on my feet, that I'm aware of most things that are going on. I understand if people are having issues and problems, and I can support them, and I can also give them a kick if they're not making deadlines, if they're not working, and I can also replace them if they're burnt out or broken. It's all about setting and reviewing strategies. A lot of people will have a strategy built within their policy or within a crisis management plan. And as Edvard von Molt said, no plan withstands first contact with the enemy. And it doesn't. And so no strategy withstands first contact with a real incident. You can have a generic strategy that will look great on paper, but based on the incident, you may have to tweak it. And we call this, certainly within the policing environment, we'll call this our working strategy, which falls out of the primary strategy, but it's the working one we're using for the incident that we're actually dealing with. And you've got to make sure that you set it, you stick it up on your incident management room wall, and then you review it constantly for its effectiveness. You've got to also make timely decisions, and this is really important for us, certainly if we come from a business continuity background, because we almost know, or we generally know, the timescales in which we're working to, because whatever service or function we're providing, it has a maximum tolerable period of disruption. So we have a line drawn in the sand where if we make decisions after that time, if we haven't achieved our objectives by that time, we may as well not bother, because we've put the function, the service, the organization in such dire straits that it's almost worth not bothering. So a lot of the time you can reverse engineer your decisions based on that's when we know we've got to have done this by, and then your decisions are reverse engineered to fit in with that. Hopefully this is where your recovery time objective comes in. But it's exactly the same with crisis, and it's exactly the same with major incidents. For example, in a disaster world, urban search and rescue operations generally only work for 5 days. So if you can't get the teams in within 3 days, there's no point in bringing them in. Same with your cyber incident. If you can't bring in the forensic teams or the specialist PR company within a very short time scale, there's no point in bringing them in because you've missed the opportunity to do that. So it's about making timely decisions. You also may have to arbitrate over finite resources, remembering that everybody's got a finite number of resources. And when they're on the table, you'll have the big egos in the room all wanting their piece of the pie. And the tough job for the leader is deciding who gets that piece of pie, how big, where, and when. And that's a tough one for the leader as well, because you've obviously got personalities involved. I have got some questions that I will get to towards the end, but I want to make sure that I get the primary content in, and then we'll pick up those questions. Okay, you've got to make sure as a leader as well, you can't do everything yourself and you can't be watching them all the time. Even though I said get on your feet and work the room, you've got to empower and support staff in what they're doing. Remember, you've brought them in because they're specialists in their field. So allow them to be specialists in the field, but you've got to coordinate their actions as the leader of the team. And the big thing, no matter what you do, we've got to be able to audit what we did, why we did it, justification, rationale for all our decisions, and we can only do that by good decision logging and maintaining an evidence trail of paper and evidence of phone calls and evidence of pictures of what we saw, and they should all be recorded. I know not all of us have to legally record those, but I think it's really good practice to think everything we write down, everything we produce, everything we use in an incident, theoretically, is evidence, either for court or for future lessons learnt or for passing on to the next team that come to replace us in 12 hours' time. Right, golden hour. Dr. Gary Klein is a naturalistic decision maker. He's an expert in how we make decisions. And one of his sort of brilliant but very common sense observation is team members need to size up not only the situation, but also each other's capabilities, roles and responsibilities at the time of the event. And what he's saying is, the problem is that if you have, and the golden hour can be used for many different things, but he uses it for the golden hour of a crisis. If you spend too much time sizing up, looking at each other's capabilities, arguing over who's the biggest dog in the room, who has the largest responsibility, who's got the biggest budget, the biggest resources, etc., what you're not doing is dealing with the incident. So that beautifully brings me on, because he's very, very keen on working together prior. Remember the very beginning I gave you a definition, and the definition was about dedicated, dynamic teams who can respond. And they're not going to be dedicated if they don't get together often enough. They're not going to be dynamic if they don't work together often enough. And I don't necessarily mean in real life situations. What I'm talking is, through training and exercising. And it's a really good way of bringing people together, and not just the annual tick box exercise that you do. I'm talking stimulated training and exercising to build your crisis management team into what you need it to be. And some of the issues I've found, certainly with working with senior people from across the globe, really is some people don't have any cultural sensitivity whatsoever. And you can either call this cultural sensitivity, or you can call it soft skills. This person, McMullen Ansog, she is a lovely mid-60s Irish-American lady who trains with me with our European Commission teaching. And she has really changed my view on the interaction of team members during crisis. And she spends an awful lot of time developing people's ability to actively listen, how to engage with people, even down to how to be polite in a crisis, because there is no excuse in a crisis for bad manners. So I always involve in my training courses some input on cultural sensitivity. I also think you should look as well at team dynamics, and Tuckman's model is perfect for this. You're probably familiar with forming, storming, norming and performing, and how that unfolds. And every single team I've ever put together for the last 30 years has gone through this. The beauty of going through this in a training or an exercise time scale is that when it comes to the real incident, you have knocked some of the edges off that. You may still have some of that, but they will much quicker to get to performing, which is where you need them to get to. You can also look at the sort of the psychological impact of stress on people's behavior. And I don't look at it from a psychologist's point of view. I look at it from the whole point of having a crisis and incident or disruption management team is to make decisions. Okay? And if those people can't make those decisions because they're not understanding what their body and their brain is going through due to stress, they're not going to be efficient and they're not going to be effective. So what I try to do is give people training in that and exercising in that, with the idea of, train hard, fight easy, idiom. It's about, if people understand that they can suffer from stress and how it manifests itself with a negative adaptation on decision making, then in the crisis they'll hopefully remember that and apply some of the basic get outs so that doesn't happen to them. Equally as well with how the brain closes down during crisis, narrowing of cognitive processes, perceptual distortion, perceptual narrowing, and how stress and crises impacts on people individually and makes them less cognitive, less ability to process data and make good decisions. And that links in beautifully with sort of the longer term crisis that may run for a few days or even longer, is around groupthink. where the group then take on a unique personality. They lose the moral understanding. They lose the moral and mental efficiency. They commit to group decisions. They lack vigilance. They're much more over optimistic than they should be, because it's all about the group. They don't take in any outsiders. The group is everything, and it's interesting to examine that within your training if you want to be the best crisis or incident management teams you can be. And I also do some individual decision style theory with my students, and I think you might consider this as well. And there's a really good questionnaire. And what it does, it looks at, it reflects a person's cognitive complexity, but also your value orientation. So it looks at your attitudes, your beliefs, your upbringing, and it gives you a series of questions about decisions you would make or things that you were important to you, and then it does pigeonhole you slightly into 4 characteristics. Out of those, you can then look at how in a crisis you might deal with decisions in a negative or a positive way, or in a different way, for example. And also, why I've included the academics who've written about these is so you can go back, research this, and give it a go within your own crisis and incident management teams. Now, the whole point people are in a crisis and incident management or a disruption team is it's all about making decisions. And what I find is in a crisis, and this is how your brain will look in a crisis when it's spinning around, what normally happens is human beings go from information to action with absolutely nothing in the middle. They think they're doing analysis, but normally what they're doing is they're going for the obvious, which may not be the right obvious. They're relying on previous experience. They're relying on things that have happened in the past, and we can't use the past to necessarily predict actions for the future. So what I'd like to introduce is, if you're not currently using decision models, you should be using decision models. And I'm not saying that mine, which I've been using since 2007, is the right model, because I use various decision models with various levels of the organization. But I find this is a lovely, quick and dirty decision model that you can stick on a piece of laminated card in your back pocket, or the first thing I always do in an incident room is stick it on the wall so people can then follow it as we go through. It is also a primary driver for decision logging, because if you don't have a methodology for your decision logging, it won't work. You have to give the decision some methodology. Certainly if you expect to end up in court, coroner's court, civil, criminal, health and safety court, for example, you're going to have something that the jury or the people judging what you did and how you did it can understand. And a decision model is a great way. Now, I know people always say to me, oh my God, you think in models all the time. Well, I do. It's an occupational hazard. But maybe we should start getting our crisis, incident and disruption management teams to start using more models to actually make our decisions an awful lot better. So let's have a look at this model. Everything starts with information. Information is the lifeblood of every single decision. And when we get some information through, we need to understand whether that information is enough to start making decisions. Now, there will be times where we won't have anywhere near enough, but there's numerous people like Toffler and Roberts who talk about the quest for perfect information. And trust me, perfect information will never come. But you need enough information, contextual information, to make you situationally aware, to then start to look at what the impact of that information is, the incident information is, on things like the life of our people, the public, our communities, the welfare, legal, regulatory issues, the environment, finance, our contracts, our SLAs, our reputation, brand value, our business objectives. Whatever impact you want to consider, you need to consider those, and that will be in a direct impact to your strategy that will come out of your policy or your plans. So apply the information to your strategic objectives for every sort of generic crisis or incident, and then think, based on this information, what's the impact on what we're actually trying to do? Out of that, you should then think of a range of options to solve or mitigate those impacts. And we're not just talking the obvious. Board blast a selection of options, and also think of the pros and cons for each option. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, in a crisis, we haven't got time to do this. Trust me, I've been dealing with incidents and crises for my entire working life, 33 years. You can do this really quickly, but still thoroughly enough to justify what you're doing. Remember, there's not always one way. Remember what I said before. In a crisis, people want to go from information to action. What they do is they miss out these component parts. They miss out actually what the impact is. And if we don't define the problem through impact analysis, we can't actually look at what options we have to solve those problems. Now, hopefully we have a plan that's detailed enough that does this for us. The impact has been looked at in our BIAs, and the options are there at strategic, tactical, and operational levels. But if it's a crisis, remember, it challenges organizations in unusual and dynamic ways. So what we might get is most of it fits, but not all of it. So we're still going to have to work the problem. So once we've got our range of options, we're then going to decide what we're actually going to do. And what I like to do with the people I train and exercise and work operationally with is look at preferred option. So what would it be if we could get everything perfectly right? An acceptable option, which is we can live with this, and an unacceptable option of what we don't want this outcome to look like. If you understand what success looks like, and if you understand what failure looks like, you'll be able to do the next bit, sorry about that, which is review. Because a lot of people come up with options, do an action, and they haven't really considered what the outcome will be. And if you don't know what the consequence or the outcome of an action is, you can't possibly review it. Bearing in mind, if we now review and we aren't fully meeting our expectations under the strategic objectives, or we aren't meeting them at all, we may have to spin the decision model again, starting with our information, what's changed, what isn't working, what can we do to change this, and then work in our system again. Whether or not you decide to use my decision model, and I'm happy that you can use that, or your own decision model, trust me, I've never run an incident or a crisis or a disruption in the past 33 years without using some form of model. Yes, it has become more sophisticated as I've gone along, but using a model really helps. It helps focus the mind. It also helps, certainly in an inquiry, or if you're studying court, God forbid, corporate manslaughter or whatever we might be stood there for, to justify what was the information, what was the impact, what did we see the impact as, what options did we consider, what did we actually do and why we did it, and then we actually reviewed to see if it worked. So we did everything we possibly could to solve this incident, crisis, disruption. Right, that's brought me to the end of what I wanted to say, but we do have a number of questions, and we do sort of have 15 minutes left, so it would be great if you could potentially come up with some more questions as we go along. What are the titles of the responsible managers that are focused on crisis management? And this is from Ralph. Well, I mean, you don't have to give them different names. What you need to do is, as I mentioned earlier, you need to look at your organization. The first place I always start is have a look at the organizational chart, have a look at the plans that you have, your crisis and incident management plans, see what's currently there, see how you currently do it, and then make sure that you have people who represent the entire organization who may be called upon, and then you have your bankers, the people who you know you're going to go to, which will be people like, if it's people to do with people, it's HR. If it's an IT issue, it's IT. If it's an operations issue, you'll probably need ops, HR, and IT. you know, if it's a security issue, you might need physical security, but also information security. You may need specialists to come in and deal with communications, internal, external, PR experts, marketing experts. You might need to bring some expertise in to deal with a cyber issue, for example. So I can't really give you the titles because I don't know what your organization actually looks like. Moving on, Jeremy's got a question about how do you get senior managers to accept leadership from a subordinate, and how do you encourage subordinates to assume decision-making capability over their superiors? Right, obviously my background is policing. There were many times where I was working with extremely senior officers. We are talking the guy who's just stepped down from the head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, and I was many ranks below him. But he would still take advice. He would still, if it was my level of expertise, assist him to make those decisions, or make those decisions, depending on what the incident was. A lot of it is to do with training and exercising together, simulating. There are on occasions where the leader has to go and do something else and people subordinate to the leader have to take over. Or the room manager's role within an incident team. Actually, who is managing the room? You may not be making the decisions, but you are facilitating successful decisions, successful solutions, and successful outcomes. So actually, who is leading the team? Because I know that I've been in with chief officers, I've also been in the private sector with people at a C-suite, and I've been facilitating those decisions. I haven't been empowered to make them, because quite occasionally I'll go in to help organizations deal with incidents as a responder, as a consultant, and I can't make those decisions because I'm not embedded within the organization, but I can help the team come to those conclusions. So it's exactly the same. And the other part, how do you get subordinates to act up? That's about confidence. And once again, we're back to that cultural sensitivity. We're back to training. We're back to us taking on that role and convincing the people above them in the food chain that they are competent and confident and they're a safe pair of hands. What I found in my career is I would see the same people managing crisis and incidents all the time. Because when somebody went to a new department or a new organization, eventually they would select the people that they could trust in an incident or a crisis, and they'd take them with them. So they developed this sort of mutual understanding, almost like, you know, I used to play a lot of rugby. When you first start as a rugby team, you don't know anyone, you don't trust anyone, you don't work well together. After a few games and some training sessions, you're in that, as Tuckman would say, you are now performing, and it's all about applying some softer skills training to your teams. I've got a question here from James. Have you had an experience of any, what you consider to be decent software applications which have supported you during crisis response? There's lots of crisis software systems out there. I'm not going to give any names. Obviously, the emergency services have their own system that they use for capturing information. But remember, I've also talked about the importance of decision logists, and I've also talked about keeping a storyboard. There are packages out there, and I think you should go and look at them. I'm not prepared to recommend any, but I have to say, in 33 years, I've never completely trusted in a system to do what I want human beings to do. Because all the software system does is put things together in a place where you can find it. You can actually do that in either paper or Excel or Word or whatever other software Office available that sits on your laptop or your PC now. It's about a methodology, a process, and a system. And I don't think any software system I've reviewed has ever quite found that for me. Okay, I've got a question now from Peter. Training and exercising with senior management support staff costs a huge amount of time and money. Is it worth for an extremely rare situation? Well, I disagree. It doesn't cost an extreme amount of money because you can do vast things in a classroom or in a boardroom with someone like me with a flip chart or with a screen and a laptop. Remember, it's content. All the flashy stuff, let's all go to a stately home for the weekend, let's spend lots of money on tons of external consultants. If you do your research and you practice these techniques further down the food chain, an operational or a tactical level, before you get up to senior management, they will feel that it's really worthwhile. They won't have to spend a lot of money, but what they will have to commit to is their own time and effort. And therein lies the problem. But remember, that is a credibility. When I've run training with the C-suite in the past, what I've generally found is the first time they're a little bit reluctant. The second, third, and fourth, as years go by, they really look forward to the biannual or annual event because they like being challenged. They like being prodded, poked, and stimulated. Because in their lives, it's something unusual, it's interesting. Most of them probably go home and watch die-hard films. They want to do something that's exciting. So you give them an environment where they can train and exercise, still being in reality, of course, but that pushes them. And if you're too soft on them, trust me, they'll hate it. I love giving these people a really hard time, and they love it. They come at the end and say, God, you had me under the cosh there. I was sweating. But they love it. They're enthused. They're excited. Give it a go. Doesn't cost a lot of money. Kathleen, how do you get management teams participants to rehearse their roles in tests? Well, it's really coming up with training and exercising or rehearsing scenarios that are A, realistic, and B, you've thought through enough that when you get to that stage, they're acting within either their technical or their expertise, or they're acting within the role in which you want them to be in. I have an adage, for example, if I run an exercise, I do weeks and weeks and weeks of reading and understanding of the organization and what the individuals do and what the plans say and what the expected outcomes are, before I write my aims and objectives for the exercise, which then leads to my expected outcomes, that then leads to my exercise plan or exercise schedule. And I have an adage in training and exercising. The facilitator should never ask a question that they don't already know the answer to. So I know what the response should generally be, and I'm looking for that response. But I'm happy if they make something that's completely different, to explore it, because it might be the right thing to do. But it's about detail and preparation before you get into there, and allowing people in a safe learning environment to then expose themselves to things that they've never done before, but in an environment where you're not challenging them. Later on, you'll challenge them after you've trained them, rehearsed them. Then you can start really exercising and testing them, but you've got to be gentle with these people. Remember, exercising is all about team building, building morale, checking that the plan works, and then bringing in, testing the people at a later stage. You'll lose people if you get really hard with them straight away. It will not work. You will lose those people. I hope that answers that question. Okay, I'm going to move on to Liz now. It's quite a lengthy question. You talked about leadership. The key to good leadership in a crisis is having trust in your team. Yep. You can only gain trust through the work you carry out on a daily and through exercising plans involving those team members. Practicing disaster management will lead to identifying the right people for the right role and to them automatically carrying out the role during a crisis. Would you agree with this concept? Yes, I would, Liz. You can't stick. It's like, for example, the British Lions have just returned from New Zealand after that they had a draw across the series. Nobody thought they were going to make it before they went out. There are a group of people brought from England, Ireland, Wales and Scotland who don't play together on a normal basis. They're thrown together for 2 weeks. They practice and they play. And at the start of the tour, They weren't very good. But then they played together over, I think it's 16 games over the month or 5-week period. And at the end, they took on the All Blacks. And they won in one game, lost in another, and drew the final game, you know, by a whisker. It's all about practice. It's all about exercise. It's all about familiarity to get through Tuckman's model and to get away from Dr. Klein's idea that they spend so much time arguing with each other and understanding where they are that they just can't operate together. Another question from Liz: an electronic system to manage a crisis is only effective if the people managing the incident are confident in their own ability. A system will only enhance the logistics or coordinating the response. And that's from Russ Parrymore, I think. Right, Russ, I agree. It's all about the people. If you put rubbish into software, you'll get rubbish out the other end. What you want is a group of human beings who are experts in their own right, and then you train them and exercise them and get them to a position where they can deal with the standard methodology of dealing with crisis incidents and disruptions, which is generally away from what they do on a day-to-day basis, but it's about really good management styles and techniques. The first time I ever put together the crisis management team at my old police force, bearing in mind the police force had been around for 40 odd years, it was the only time all those people had ever been together in a room before. And the benefit of training with these people, a lot of them said, well, we never really understood your problems. We never understood how that fitted with this. We never understood that those were your complications in an incident. And we wouldn't have had that if we hadn't used training and exercise to break down those cultural sensitive barriers, those work egos, those departmental silos during training and exercising. I can't get to it enough. It is about the effort you put in training will pay huge benefits on the pitch. And I think I'm 2 minutes before I should be up, and I think that's a perfect statement to finish on. So I'm going to hand you back to Lachlan now, because there are no more questions. Can I thank you very much for taking part today? I love doing things like this. Hopefully you can tell I'm enthusiastic about helping people prepare better for crisis, and I'll hand you back to Lachlan.
James, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed listening into your wise words today. And thank you very much for everyone for asking loads of questions. It really kind of brings it more to life when loads of people are kind of joining in. So thank you very much, James, and we'll speak to you in a couple of seconds, I'm sure. For everyone else, we'll be sending out a copy of the webinar today as today's bulletin in case you missed some or all of it. If you have any feedback, please just reply to any of the emails that you have received from us, and we'll take the necessary action if required. As I mentioned at the beginning, our next webinar will be on Friday, 25th of August at the later time of 2 p.m. with our friend from Florida, Ralph Petty, and we'll be on supply chain business continuity planning and how critical it is for the SMB market. In the meantime, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you again in the future. Thank you very much. Goodbye.